Una Smith there. Right, Minister, let's try and clear up a couple of things tonight. First of all, on the ESM funding, is your government categorically stating that if we have a no result, we will not be able to access that and that we won't be able to access any European funding if we need a second bailout?
I think firstly it's important to say what the ESM is. There has never been a permanent rescue mechanism before in the Eurozone or in the European Union, and it now will be created. It will be created this summer, and it will ultimately provide a backstop, a guarantee, an insurance, if you like, of €700 billion for the countries who sign up to it, potentially. 25 member states are signing up to it. Access to the ESM is absolutely contingent on ratification of the treaty. So if we decide not to ratify the treaty on the 31st of May, we're saying that we basically accept that we won't have access to the ESM.
Was that folly for the government to sign us up to such a restrictive clause?
Well, you can argue that. I contend, and I think it's important to note, and John Bruton alluded to it there, that the countries that are paying into this, Ireland will pay a minuscule contribution to the ESM relative to many other member states. The creditor countries, the countries that are paying the bulk of the money of the €700 billion, are looking for some sort of guarantees that, countries, not specifically Ireland, but any country, won't plunder the fund and then, continue with reckless spending policies,
but it is almost
living beyond their means. But that's very important, because I don't think it's unreasonable. In fact, I think it's important.
Like blackmail in a sense, isn't it? Because what you're saying to the voters here in Ireland and what you've signed them up for is, unless you vote yes, you won't be able to get a second bailout.
That's to suggest that for some reason the other 24 countries who are signing up to this sat around the table and said, how can we put a gun, or how can we blackmail Ireland? Clearly that's quite ludicrous. The reality is that all member states will benefit from the safeguard, will benefit particularly the member states of the currency union, of the euro, the 17 countries who are part of the currency. No, I just want to, if I can finish the point, because it's important. If the 17 countries who are part of the currency say that we want to have binding rules, we want to have safeguards, we want to be sure that all of the countries who are going to have access to the ESM will be obliged to abide by basic rules. I think that's important.
People may not like it, but it looks like this is the situation we have been signed up to. So what will we do if we need a second bailout and we vote no?
We haven't signed up to it yet. I think that's first very important. When the ESM was drafted last July, it didn't contain this blackmail clause, as it were, and the criteria that the Minister has just quoted, that our access to those funds is a contingent on ratification of the fiscal treaty, was in fact added in to the text in February of this year, and that requires the unanimous backing of all the member states, including Ireland. We haven't ratified it in Ireland yet. There'll be a vote in the Dáil in terms of the ESM itself, but also on amending the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, which has been designed in order to facilitate the thing. So if you like, what they're actually doing here is, it's like giving someone a gun and then running down the road screaming that you're afraid you're going to get shot.
You saw John Bruton in that film, and what he said was, if we fail to sign up to this and say we need a second bailout, when many people believe we will need a second bailout, we can't access the IMF because they're saying they'll only come in if the EU are involved. We'll have no friends, or very few friends left in the EU. Where will we get the money?
There's a couple of things. It's just not true what John Bruton says, because as some of the other interviewees said, that under the temporary scheme as it exists at the moment, the EFSF, there's still a facility to access funds there up until 2013. It's also the case that the ESM has not been ratified yet, and it requires the unanimous agreement of all member states, including Ireland. So if the government and the Minister have a problem with that clause, it's perfectly simple. Turn around and say, remove that clause, as it was at the beginning, and therefore then we'll be in a position to sign up to it.
Let me ask you something, Minister. Somebody said today, actually Shane Ross brought it up, why don't you defer? Why the speed with this referendum? Should we wait?
Well, I mean, this treaty was negotiated a number of months ago. It was agreed formally, the content of the treaty was agreed in January, and it's our view that as a programme country, as a country that's doing its level best and has worked extremely hard and made enormous sacrifices over the last number of years to get back on track, to create stability, to restore certainty, investor confidence and so on, that the quicker we can send out a resounding message to potential investors from the United States, from China, from the rest of Europe, that Ireland is committed to its currency, that we are committed to abiding by the sort of rules that will bind all members of the currency union. The quicker we can do that, the better.
Part of the problem is, in our interest to do it. If we vote no, there seems to be a problem. If we vote yes, there seems to be a problem. Because if we vote yes, what we're signing up to, they're very, very strict budgetary requirements. You know, the 60% debt to GDP ratio, and I'm losing half the population at this stage. The structural deficit can't be higher than 0.5% of GDP. The annual budget deficit can't exceed 3% of GDP. Either way, it leaves us very little flexibility at a time when everyone says we need to grow.
But most of these rules have already been in place. I mean, the fact is that they existed once we signed up to monetary union in the first place, but actually people just ignore them. So what we're ensuring is that for the first time, that the rules which we all signed up to when we joined the currency union, like the 3% deficit requirement, will now actually be binding. And you know, it's countries like us that will benefit most from that, because the bigger countries are the ones who have ignored the rules in the past. And what we're saying is that, you know, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. It's not acceptable that small member states had to abide by the rules and large member states got to ignore the rules. Now everybody, there will be automatic sanctions and people will have to.
There's a couple of very serious dangers in the line of argument that the Minister is making here. Firstly, it's incorrect to say that this is just more of the same. It is more of the same, but there are huge additional provisions which will require extra austerity on people who are already dramatically suffering because of the economic crisis in this situation. Now, it's undisputed that in order to meet the criteria being laid down by the treaty, it will require an extra $6 billion in cuts.
Well,
and I'd like
disputed.
the answer.
It is disputed,
I would like the Minister.
You.
Well, can you dispute it with some
I
facts?
certainly will, yes.
Because that is, it has not been disputed anywhere factually. And I think the people at home, the lone parents, the people who are suffering, who can't get SNAs, whose domiciliary care allowance has been cut, would like to know, the people who are being foisted with extra taxes, what extra taxes and cuts do you intend to foist on them in order to balance the books, to pay bank debts that were never ours in the first place?
The government and the Minister for Finance has laid out already a 4-year budgetary plan for this country. We are on track. We are meeting our targets. What we don't need is the uncertainty that would be created by a no vote at the end of this month in order to put us off that track. We have worked too hard for it, and I agree with you, Clare. The fact is that we are stretching ourselves to pay the carers allowance, to pay the pensions of our older people. No, that's not true. But I just want to make this point that we are at our outermost limits, and we're all very conscious of the huge sacrifices that have been made. But we have to pay teachers' salaries.
I need to bring Clare
but Clare doesn't have to worry about this.
I need to bring Clare in more, because I need to give her the same amount of time, actually. One of the things that Clare did, I was listening to your launch today, I mean, you talk about the, you know, household charge and the water charges. What have they got to do with the referendum?
Well, you see, I think it is the case that this is continuing the austerity agenda, which is foisting extra taxation, extra cutbacks on the backs of ordinary people in order to pay for essentially a private debt crisis of the banking debt crisis, which
to bring that up as though they're so unpopular anyway, and you're saying to people, if you vote whatever way in this election, you're really voting for household charges and water charges.
No, what we're saying is that it's all part of the austerity agenda. This treaty enshrines austerity. If the government is defeated on this, we know that the household tax is only a gateway tax in order to introduce further property and water taxes. If they get knocked back on the introduction of the treaty, well, then their moral authority is going to be damaged. It makes it more difficult for them to move on with the agenda of austerity. I think they're going to be clearly in disarray if that is the case. So the point we're making is, and it is, you know, you didn't answer the question. This treaty dictates terms which require us to bring our deficit down to 0.5%. Your own Department of Finance guesstimate that it will be 3.7% by 2015. To bridge that gap will require an extra $6 billion in cuts, and I think you should tell the population how you intend them to pay. Is it more property taxes? Is it more cutbacks in education? What recipe are you dishing up if they vote yes?
But firstly, what this treaty requires us to do is to live within our means. The treaty is very clear. It sets out in the first article that programme countries, that's currently Ireland, Portugal and Greece, that we are in a different circumstance to other countries within the European Union. So there will be flexibility. It's very clear, and it is spelt out in the six-pack of measures, which is the legislative measures which were introduced during the year 2011, that there will be a 3-year period of adjustment. So from 2015, when we exit the programme, to 2018, there is an adjustment period. Can I finish? Because this is deeply misleading. This threat, which appears to me of €6 billion, which seems to have come from the back of an envelope. It's based on a fantasy.
And what
Prime Minister, let Clare get in, because I am. They're timing it upstairs.
Because we have mentioned statistics and facts, and you just answer with rhetoric. I think it's incredible that your government has presided over a situation where the only argument really you can put forward is this idea that we will not be able to access future funds, when every day in the Dáil you tell us that we're not going to need future funds. Why does this country need to access future funds? Primarily because we're shouldering private banking debts, which is an unsustainable situation for the future. And whatever terms, if a second bailout is posed, it will mean an absolutely devastating blow to the living standards of ordinary people. And you see, the lesson that's been drawn by people in Ireland is the best contribution we can make to Europe and the tens of thousands of people who are marching on May Day today in every European country is to say that actually we should be looking at a different type of Europe, not that one that enshrines austerity, but one that invests in jobs and growth.
I wish that I lived in Clare's world of fantasy, where we can just grow money on trees and we can pretend that we can somehow magically pay for pensions and for teachers' salaries and for nurses and keep our schools open without the sort of difficult measures which the government has had to adopt.
And you want
to talk about facts and figures, and I agree with that. So what about the figure of €18 billion? That's the figure that's going to be required in 2014 when we go back into the international markets.
Jobs, and this time for a working Ireland. Everybody knows that from the last Lisbon vote to now, there are 119,000 less people at work than there were before. What we have is sort of bluster and innuendo.
I wouldn't like to think where we would be right
you've
now.
You've lied in Lisbon, and I think it's the same nonsense this time round.
We'll be coming back to this debate for the next 4 weeks, sadly. Thank you both very much. Richard.